An extraordinary admission from the chair of the Republican National Committee. Speaking Tuesday at DePaul University, Michael Steele told students, quote, "For the last 40-plus years, we, meaning the Republican Party, had a Southern strategy that alienated many minority voters by focusing on the white male vote in the South." What makes those words remarkable is they come from the leader of a Republican Party that's long denied employing a race-based Southern strategy to win elections. Despite the fact that Republicans gained votes in the South during Richard Nixon's 1968 presidential campaign and turned the Southern states into reliable Republican electoral votes, the party has not usually acknowledged that it had anything to do with a calculated whites-only appeal. To quote Pat Buchanan, a self-acknowledged co-architect of the Nixon strategy, quote, "The charge that we built our Republican coalition on race is a lie." Not according to RNC Chairman Michael Steele, it's not. Mr. Steele also alleged that Republicans used their Southern strategy for decades, well into the Reagan years and beyond. That view at odds even with Republicans who've tried to address the party's history of race and politics. Former RNC Chairman Ken Mehlman, for example, told the NAACP in 2005 that the Republican Party had alienated voters and had even tried to, quote, benefit politically from racial polarization. But Mr. Mehlman said that had happened in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. He promised that the Republican Party was, as of the 2000s, committed to inclusion. But in Michael Steele's telling this week, Republicans have pursued a Southern strategy, he said, for 40 years, which would be right up through the 2008 election. Not a shocking assertion that the Republican Party might have capitalized on racial polarization in search of power during its history, but it is a do-whoop moment to hear the chairman of the party now admit it in public. Joining us now is Rick Perlstein, senior fellow at the Campaign for America's Future and author most recently of the book Nixonland, The Rise of a President and the Fracturing of America. Rick, it's great to have you on the show. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, glad to be here, Rachel.
The Southern strategy is something that gets talked about in politics a lot, but the details are always a little woolly. What really was it specifically?
It was something very, very specific, actually. Not a lot of people remember that basically after the New Deal, black voters in cities like Chicago, New York, Cleveland were actually considered the swing voters in American politics. There were enough of them who'd kept this kind of vestigial Republican loyalty from the Civil War years and the idea that the Republican Party were the party that freed the slaves, that the idea that you had to get enough of these voters away from their economic commitment to the Democratic Party into the Republican Party in a presidential election basically determined how states like Ohio, in Illinois, and New York would go. And what started happening in 1964, first with Barry Goldwater, and then with 1968, was the Republicans basically made a very conscious decision that if they appealed to white voters in the South, they didn't need these black voters in the North anymore. So there literally was, we don't need black voters anymore, so how can we get these white voters instead? It was very, very specific and very deliberate, and they knew exactly what they were doing.
Did architects of the Southern strategy express regret or remorse for it at all in the way that Michael Steele seemed to this week?
Well, the fascinating thing about it is it seems to happen at regular intervals. I mean, one of the architects of it in the Nixon years was a guy named Harry Dent. And after he retired, he became a preacher, and he apologized for it right before he died. Lee Atwater became Republican Party chair. He apologized for it kind of when he's on his deathbed. So you can almost say kind of when these guys get ready to meet their maker, they kind of man up and own up to the strategy. Even Ken Mehlman was kind of out the door and, kind of writing his resume for history when he said it was happening. So, it says interesting things about, what we can expect from Michael Steele, whether he's, heading out the door or whether he's trying to extend his tenure by, basically setting up a deal where if you kick me out, maybe it's just because I was a truth teller on this civil rights issue.
Rick, you have written epic, seminal histories of modern conservative politics. Is there a revisionism effort among conservatives to pretend this didn't happen? Will what Michael Steele said be upsetting to people who want to say that this never actually existed in history?
Oh, it'll be profoundly upsetting. I mean, we saw it from Pat Buchanan, like you say. The idea, basically, even Glenn Beck now is trying to claim Martin Luther King as his forebearer. The idea of the civil rights movement, the idea that African Americans were oppressed and had to be liberated is very central to basically every American's conception of what a moral citizenship looks like. So it's very awkward for the Republicans to try and kind of deal with this as it comes up every 5-10 years.
Rick Perlstein, Senior Fellow at the Campaign for America's Future and the author of Nixonland, which is required reading for everybody in the whole country. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Rick. It's good to see you.
Love to be here.